Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the glory of God and His kingdom. We have a very special treat in store for you with a special hour of conversation with one of the, most brilliant men I know, one of the great freedom fighters of our time, and a man who has conceptualized and articulated, I think, what we are up against in a way that is unsurpassed. And I am extremely pleased, as well as feeling really privileged, that Alex Newman is going to spend this full show talking with us about the things that are troubling him and us, and helping us understand what both is the problem and what we must do about it. Before, there's a little bit of good news, I think, that I wanted to share with you by way of introduction to a topic that will be front and center in our conversation with Alex Newman, and that is the Chinese Communist Party and what it is up to, and with whose help. Here we go, some comments of my own. The claxons are sounding on Wall Street. Finally, analysts are beginning to take seriously the prospect that the U.S. financial sector's long-standing practice of underwriting our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party, is becoming untenable. Praise the Lord. For example, one insider newsletter recently put it this way, quote, "We continue to believe the delisting of Chinese stocks from U.S. exchanges is increasingly likely, as we believe both Republicans and Democrats will push for action. This is because there is no political downside to blocking Chinese firms from accessing U.S. capital, while there is significant political risk to being branded as supporting the Chinese military and Chinese competition to U.S. companies," unquote. In fact, for those very reasons, we should see both the relatively small number of Chinese companies listed on our exchanges and the thousands of others being traded there removed forthwith. Well, those are my thoughts. For more of them, please follow me at X, as you can at Frank Gaffney, also at usfuture.org, the website of our Institute for the American Future, and, not least, securingamerica.substack.com. A wealth of options. I hope you will follow them closely. As you do, I hope this program as well. Alex Newman is, as I've mentioned, an extraordinary intellect and real leader in the fight for freedom. He is the driving force behind a wonderful platform, Liberty Sentinel. He has a podcast, the Sentinel Report. His books are numerous. I will only mention the most recent of them, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, a book that, among others, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has strongly endorsed. I strongly endorsed everything I think that I know of, certainly, that Alex Newman does, and I cannot thank him enough for both his service to our country in these various respects, as well as his periodic visits with us, and allowing me, on occasion, to visit with him at Sentinel Report. Alex Newman, welcome back to Securing America, my friend. It's great to have you with us.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me, Frank.
Well, I want to set the stage for a conversation first about what we just discussed there a little bit, the Chinese Communist Party, by suggesting that the way I conceive of this, and I've learned a lot from you about all of it, is we're facing a kind of totalitarian trifecta, Alex. We are witnessing the emerging danger, really, of not just the Chinese Communist Party, and not just the globalists, and not just the, I call them Sharia supremacists, but all three working in concert for a common purpose, namely taking down our country. Would you address yourself sort of to that proposition? Am I overstating it, or do you think that's about right?
I don't think you're overstating it at all, Frank. I think we have a very real international alliance of forces that are united primarily by their hostility toward the United States, toward what we used to call the Western world or the free world or even Christendom. And at first glance, I think people are surprised that communists could be working with Islamists, could be working with globalists, because they seem to have very different interests. But they are all united, we have to remember, on this one issue of destroying America, because you can't have a global caliphate with America exercising massive diplomatic, political, military, and economic power. You can't have a one-world technocratic order like the World Economic Forum and a lot of their allies are pushing for. And you can't have a one-world communist totalitarian system as long as the United States remains basically an unchallengeable hegemonic power. So all of these different groups see the destruction of the United States as one of the key objectives that needs to be met before they can move on to the greater thing of building up this one world system that they want. And in that, they're absolutely united. And this is not some unique discovery that we have made. I mean, a lot of very intelligent people have talked about this. Rich Higgins, who was the director of policy and planning on the National Security Council during the first Trump administration, articulated this brilliantly in the Higgins memo. And so I'm glad that we have people in office right now who understand that this is what we're dealing with. It is a very significant threat, actually multiple threats coalescing into one. But I think if we play our cards right, we can hold them back and we can preserve our country. But it's going to be a tough battle. We're already involved in this battle. Most people just haven't realized it yet. But it's a very, very real threat, Frank.
I wish you had told me otherwise. I was hoping against hope that I've got this wrong, but I fear what you've said is exactly right. Let me just say I strongly second your accolades for, unfortunately, the late Rich Higgins. He is not one of those inside this administration, though it would have been truly a blessing had he been. He served with distinction, albeit briefly, in the first Trump term, and we lost him to, I think, complications arising from COVID, but there's some speculation about all of that. A great, great man indeed. And just to fine-tune what you've said, Alex, you described the three end states that these groups respectively seek. It's world government, world order, if you will, irrespective of the particular brand. But what is interesting is it's very different. I mean, probably not so much to people who would be enslaved by any one of them, but in terms of who's going to be in charge. Is it your view that those differences are somehow no longer operating in the interest of getting rid of us, or will they ultimately result, once that immediate goal is achieved, in taking down this this modus vivendi, if you will, between them, and leave the world presumably afflicted with a great horror in a new conflict amongst them?
Yeah, I think inevitably, if they succeed in taking down the United States, they're going to turn on each other. And you're exactly right. They have very different visions for the future. Certainly the Chinese Communist Party is not interested in a global Islamic caliphate. In fact, they treat their Muslim population with some disdain. Right? The Uyghurs in Western China can tell you about that. It's horrific. And of course, the Muslims are not interested in a communist system. So, but what we've seen, and this has been going on for many decades, is a working relationship between them. One of the incredible revelations that we got from Ion Pacepa, Lieutenant General, the head of Romanian intelligence during Soviet times, it was kind of a Soviet puppet state, was that the KGB, under Yuri Andropov and others, had sent thousands of communist agents into the Middle East to train and radicalize jihadist leaders who could then be used as a battering ram against the United States, against Israel, against the broader Western world. So right now they're in the destruction phase, right? They have to destroy what is to be able to, in their vision, build back better, whether that be a caliphate or a global totalitarianism, right? Yeah. And so the destruction phase, they can all work together, right? The demolition phase. And after that, they would absolutely turn on each other. But I think right now, the unity and the discipline in this alliance is very interesting to behold, because you do have people who have radically different views about where the world should go, about how people should live, actually cooperate. And we see this right now in kind of the red-green axis that we're seeing materialize in the United States, like with this guy.
Hold that thought, Alex. We have to take a very short break. I want to come back to that axis. I'm now actually calling it the red-green-blue axis, for reasons we'll discuss further on the other side. Stay tuned, folks. We're back with Alex Newman. I neglected to mention the utterly obvious. We are on the road. We are in a mobile studio, as I like to call it, bereft of the trappings of our usual arrangement, and we're very appreciative that our guest is putting up with all of it, and hopefully you will as well. Alex Newman, of course, of Liberty Sentinel, is with us, and we are spending the full hour addressing the kinds of problems that I think he, really without peer, is helping to chronicle and characterize, and also very creatively recommend countervailing actions against. And Alex, let's drill down a bit further on this idea that we're not only facing around the world the ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party. I think of really what we're in as World War Xi, with various acts of strategic arson in places like Ukraine and the Middle East, and quite possibly in the Far East very soon, being set by Xi Jinping. So we'll come back to the Chinese communists in a minute. Also noting that the bad guys in the Middle East, the Sharia supremacists, are at work there big time trying to destroy Israel. We've also got folks in Geneva and even United Nations. As we speak, there's a confab going on about a Palestinian state, brought to us by France and Saudi Arabia, the globalists in short. We'll get into all of that more in detail when we proceed. But first up, you made the point just before the break that this is not just someplace else, that this red-green axis, or if you will, red-green-blue for the globalists, is very much operating in our country as well. Say a word about that, and we'll back the lens up about the Chinese communists in a moment.
Yeah, well, thank you, Frank. And this is now really coming out of the closet, this alliance between various totalitarian forces. And you see it very clearly in the person of Mamdani in New York City. Here you have a guy who is an actual Islamist, who is openly working with socialists, who describes himself as a democratic socialist, whose campaign is being supported by the entire architecture of the Democratic Socialists of America, the Communist Party. And you have the same thing in various other parts of the United States. You see this very clearly as well in Minnesota, where you have Islamists working with socialists. And again, at first glance, it doesn't seem to make sense to people. How could you have Islamists and the LGBT crowd working together in an alliance? It only starts to make sense once you realize that they have a common enemy. And once they're done dealing with the enemy, then they can sort out their differences.
And that, my friends, is the rub. Sorting out their differences is something that will be preceded by their common destruction of this country. And the Chinese are extremely open about that ambition, Alex. I listen with some horror, I have to say, to various conversations, even among officials of our government, to the effect that we're going to have trade arrangements and tariff understandings and various other deals with the Chinese Communist Party, including deals whereby we rely upon them for example, the supply of rare earth minerals and chips and all manner of other products, without regard to the fact that they insist, medicine among them, they insist that they are intent on destroying this country, the CCP and its various outlets. What's up with all that, sir?
It's very troubling, Frank, and I've been sounding the alarm about this for so many years. What we have is a situation that was deliberately created by policymakers in the United States, both in government, and this is a bipartisan problem, by the way. I don't want people to think that I'm being partisan here. Plenty of Republicans have contributed to this situation, and also by many of our corporate elites. I think the corporate elites, many of them were just looking for slightly larger profit margins. The political players, I think, had probably slightly different motivations, but they created a situation now where the United States has become entirely dependent on the CCP, on the Chinese economy, to be able to have certain basic goods, as you mentioned, medicine, and some of these goods are even in the national security sector. I mean, we can't maintain a lot of weapons systems without some of the minerals that we're acquiring from China. So this is not a situation that needs to persist indefinitely. And I think of the people in the administration, Peter Navarro, I think has a very good understanding of this. My guess is there's a little bit of negotiation strategy going into some of the public statements that Donald Trump is making, but I think he understands this as well. Right now they have us in a very tough situation. If we were just to immediately cut off trade with communist China, it would be extremely painful for Americans. But I think if they take it step by step, if they do this in a well thought out manner, we can end our dependence starting in certain key sectors and then move to a broader disengagement with the Chinese economy. I hope that's where they're going. I thought initially that was where they were going, and I still hope that they will move in that direction. But I share your concern about some of the public statements we've seen from some elected officials.
Let's go back to the commentary, Alex. One of the pieces of this, if you believe, as I think we both do, that there is no, détente, shall we say, with the Chinese Communist Party. It is a zero-sum game, as the political scientists put it. We win, they lose, or vice versa. What do you make of the fact, and again, this goes back to your larger point about our policies over the years, that we are persisting through Wall Street in having our money, pension funds and mutual funds and college savings accounts and exchange-traded funds, you on and on, whatever pick your investment vehicle, used to, provide life support, I would argue, for the Chinese Communist Party. Is that just another, unfortunate example of bad policies in the past, or is there something else going on that it persists to this day, and should it?
I would regard it as almost criminal. I mean, the idea of using money from American investors, from American pension fund holders to build up the most murderous regime in the world, in my opinion, is way beyond stupid. We're talking here about a deliberate betrayal of the United States of America. And certainly there are profit-motivated actors, but I think the bigger picture, and we've seen some of the highest level people talk about this. I mean, we saw the head of BlackRock, Larry Fink, publicly say markets like totalitarian systems. That's crazy, all right? The innovation is coming from free market systems. Totalitarian systems are just ripping off our technology, our research and development, using slave labor to be able to undercut prices from real manufacturers here in the United States. It's a criminal operation that's going on here, and it absolutely has to stop. China is not a market that has liberalized. It's just a new market where we can expand and sell our products. People have to understand about the Chinese communist economy. It is entirely controlled from the top down by the CCP. They've only introduced enough market mechanisms and market reforms so that the thing wouldn't crash, so they could sucker Americans out of investment funds and dollars. But this is a criminal system. And as you pointed out, Frank, it's not designed to build up the lives of the Chinese people. It's designed to build a war machine that will be turned on us and our allies as soon as they feel the time is right to strike.
Boy, I couldn't have said that better. And just one example, Alex, of something that happened in May of this year. I mean, this is the hour is very late, I would argue. Jamie Dimon's J.P. Morgan and Brian Moynihan's Bank of America just raised $4.6 billion, conservatively, in an IPO out of Hong Kong for a Chinese military company operating in the United States, so-called by the Pentagon, called CATL, C-A-T-L. Among other things, it is improving the capacity of our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party, to attack our naval fleets and personnel. This is, as you say, beyond insane. This is treason, it seems to me, and I earnestly hope that what I said at the beginning is going to eventuate here, that the end is at hand, that Congress, on a bipartisan basis, is going to say enough. We'll be right back with more on other aspects of this red, green, blue axis with Alex Newman of Liberty Sentinel. Stay tuned. We're back. So is Alex Newman. Praise the Lord. We revere, really, the work that he does at Liberty Sentinel, partly because of its extraordinary quality, frankly, but also partly because it is so desperately needed, the kind of truth-telling that he does consistently on matters foreign and domestic, about enemies in both categories, but also about what we must be doing if we wish to bequeath to our children and our children's children what our forefathers gave us and we have been blessed to live in and prosper from. Alex, we'll come back to the home front here in a bit, but one other thing that I believe you have devoted extraordinary effort to understanding and helping the rest of us sort is this phenomenon of globalism, for want of a better term. It's associated, of course, with the World Economic Forum, which under Klaus Schwab was endlessly regaling us with horrible ideas of a new world order under their control. Much admiring of the Chinese Communist Party, by the way, and collaborating with them in numerous ways. But you also have been very focused on and helped really expose what is up with these so-called international organizations, starting with the starting with the United Nations, but also very, very much focused on the World Health Organization. Walk us through the agenda of these globalists and what it will mean for all of us if they succeed.
Well, globalism, as the name implies, is this effort to create this one world system. And it's got political dimensions, it's got economic dimensions, and more we're even seeing the religious dimensions of this coming out. And it has become far more public, far more open in recent years, where they're doing weird rituals. They're walking up to the top of Mount Sinai during a UN climate summit and unveiling the new 10 Commandments. But their ultimate objective, I think, is to undermine national sovereignty and undermine what's left of self-government, to turn the United Nations into what the most recent Secretary General before the current one, his name was Ban Ki-moon, described as the Parliament of Humanity. So if you look up Parliament in the dictionary, it's a sovereign legislative body with the ability to make laws. And so when Secretary General Ban Ki-moon talked about the UN as the Parliament of Humanity, not a lot of people paid attention, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. They want it to become, and many of the alliances that are hostile to the United States and the typical Western order, things like the BRICS, things like the G77 plus China, have fully embraced this vision. They've talked about turning the UN General Assembly into an emblem of global sovereignty. And that fits nicely with the vision of these Western global elites. Maybe not exactly in the details and how things should run, but the idea that policymaking in all these different dimensions should be moved to the UN, to UN agencies like the World Health Organization, like UNESCO. This is pervasive among the political class, not just in the United States, but across the entire Western world. And it does mean the end of national independence. It means the end of the rights that we have taken for granted in this country for so long. If you don't have a national government with the ability to uphold those rights, you really don't have any protections for those rights, which means you lose them. And all of this is coming at us like a freight train through all these different international institutions. I think it behooves people to pay attention, because once that sovereignty is gone, it will become very, very difficult to ever reclaim it.
Boy, is that ever so. And here's a case in which, as you were saying earlier, good people inside the U.S. government, the administration of Donald Trump in particular, and to some extent in the Congress, not as many as one would hope there, but still, we've seen a fairly robust pushback against the globalist agenda, notably by the president's announced decision to withdraw from the World Health Organization as soon as he can, which is not until January of next year. Talk a little bit about why that is so important, Alex, but perhaps not sufficient unto the day. Witness what just went down recently with these international health regulation amendments. Another, skirmish, if you will, or battle for that matter, against this world elite, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, seems to have a lot more in common, irrespective of their state or their nations, than they do with the rest of us, which tells you something about the kind of parliament they have in mind, doesn't it, Alex?
That's right. And when you look at the G77 plus China, for example, they've got 134 member countries. That's a super majority in this so-called parliament. And this is led by communist China and some of the most nasty kleptocratic socialist regimes, Islamist regimes in the world. That is something that Americans really need to regard as a serious threat. But to your point
and this axis between the communists of China and these globalists, yeah.
Absolutely. And I encourage people to just read the declarations that they put out. They met in Bolivia in 2013, I believe it was, and they put out the Declaration on a New World Order to Live Well. And I would encourage people to just read these declarations and see what these hostile geopolitical foes of the United States are publicly saying in these documents. And the UN Secretary General shows up and blesses their meeting. It's truly extraordinary that this is happening out in the open and so few people are talking about it. So the World Health Organization is obviously a major front in this battle because they see healthcare as something that intersects with the lives of every person on the planet at some point. And now they've taken such an expansive view of healthcare that they say climate change and racism and gun violence are all public health crises that need to be dealt with by an empowered WHO. Every aspect of your life at some point falls under this so-called healthcare rubric. And so the WHO is really one of the critical fronts. We saw it during COVID, how WHO policy basically became policy worldwide, almost without question. The international health regulations were an effort to institutionalize that, enshrine that into what they consider to be international law. And so what we had here with Trump announcing the withdrawal and then Secretary Kennedy announcing that we weren't going to be accepting the international health regulations is a major change in momentum. Under the Biden regime, we were going along for the ride on this out-of-control freight train, and now not only have we hit the brakes, now we're turning in the other direction. That's very encouraging.
I would argue, to use your metaphor, Alex, we were piling on the coal. I mean, we were in headlong pursuit of this, really.
Throwing money into it, and absolutely, and encouraging other nations to join. So this is very significant, and it's one of several victories that we've seen recently. Just last week, the Trump administration announced that we were going to be leaving the UNESCO, which I regard as one of the most important UN agencies, although it doesn't get as much attention, because it's the one that is working to standardize and centralize control over education worldwide, and hence the minds of future voters, future political leaders, future business leaders. So all these things are happening in tandem. Just also, last few days, Frank, we had the International Court of Justice, which the UN regards as the kind of supreme court of the world, issue a ruling claiming that all governments have a legal obligation to fight carbon dioxide, the gas we exhale, and that failure to do so is an internationally wrongful act, which is a very subtle way of saying we will come after you if you don't do what we say here that you are allegedly obligated to do under international law. So despite these victories that we've seen, the globalist movement is still advancing, and we've got to have serious action from the Congress if this is going to be stopped.
Well, just to put a fine point on it, Alex, and I think you've sort of implicitly said this, but is really the choice at the end of the day as basic as will we continue to have a constitutional republic that is sovereign and that in fact is limited to some extent, at least per our Constitution, or will that be supplanted by this new order over which we have essentially no control? I mean, majority votes are all that's required in the UN General Assembly, for example, where they adopted this plan for the future recently. And of course, the WHO's World Health Assembly, ditto. You know, we look to places where we have a veto, like the UN Security Council, but that does not protect us against the tyranny of, well, the mob, does it, in these various fora?
That's exactly right, Frank. And I do think it's good for people to understand that those are essentially our choices. Either we will survive as an independent republic based on the self-evident truths that our founding fathers enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, that God created us, that he endowed us with rights, governments exist to protect those rights, or we will have a world along the lines of what the United Nations is calling for, where you get human rights, which are really privileges given to you by international agreements, given to you by governments that can be revoked or regulated away at will. Those are the two options. These are ideas that cannot coexist over the long term. Either it's going to be self-governing independent republic, or it's going to be the system that the United Nations is talking about. The two cannot coexist. They are not compatible with each other on any level. And that's not my opinion, by the way, Frank. The UN says this on a regular basis. They sent their special rapporteur on the right to education here, just released a report very recently saying that the United States is not complying with international law because we still have local policy making on education, because we're not teaching enough DEI and LGBT. They are the ones saying, you cannot continue like this. You have to do what we say. So Americans need to understand that too.
And the question is, will they gain powers to impose all of this on us? And I just want to salute you, Alex, for really, among other things, schlepping around to these various conferences and you know, their treaty-making events to monitor and to warn about what is afoot. But make no mistake about it, as you say, the World Health Organization is pushing forward with these various treaties that are designed to give power to declare public health emergencies of international concern to this Chinese communist puppet, Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General there, and the authority to tell member nations what to do about those problems. That is a frontal assault on sovereignty, and I'm deeply grateful to President Trump for saying, no, we won't go there. Alex, we have to take a very short break. When we come back, I want to turn to the third part of this tripartite totalitarian enterprise, what I call the Sharia supremacists of Islam, what they're up to, and what we'd better be doing about it, even here in the United States. Stay tuned for more. I'll be right back. We're back, and so is Alex Newman. I couldn't be more pleased to say we've managed to get an hour of his time very early, as it happens, as we were taping, and I want to thank him for being so generous with what is a very limited commodity. He's a man much in demand in various places because of his, well, I call it free-range mind, that is understanding the sorts of, well, existential threats to freedom, as Ronald Reagan used to say, in the various forms that they take and the various collusions that are making it truly perilous for freedom-loving people in this country and elsewhere around the world. One of the other engines of that peril, Alex, as you know so well, is an aspect of what we're told by some is just another great Abrahamic faith, really a partner for us through things like the Abraham Accords, for example, and that we ought to defer to when it comes to the insistence that its adherents have to Sharia. I call it the sort of Islamic operating code. I want to come to all of that in just a moment, but you had a final point before we leave the globalist topic that I think really does warrant attention as well.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Appreciate it very much. So one of the ingredients that's been missing from this agenda to create the one world system is a steady source of revenue. Right now, when the UN wants to do something, if they don't have it in their budget already, they have to go beg governments for money. And that happens regularly. Whenever the Secretary General or some UN agency comes up with a new idea, they'll try to find different ways to extract money from taxpayers of various countries, typically the United States and Western Europe. But right now, there is a very, very serious movement to break free of that final constraint through the little-known UN agency called the International Maritime Organization, which is in charge, basically, likes to pretend like it's in charge of international shipping and the oceans. There is already in the final stages a global tax plan. It was approved back in April at a meeting in London. They've got one more meeting coming up in October, and they hope that by the beginning of 2027, they're going to be bringing in, the last estimate of theirs that I saw was $100 billion annually in carbon taxes on international shipping. And they themselves say this is an effort to save the planet from climate change by regulating emissions. But they say only 3% of global emissions are coming from international shipping. So if they can set the precedent that they can tax us, a direct tax on humanity, bypassing national governments under the guise of controlling emissions of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and so on, if they can tax shipping for that, which is 3%, they can certainly tax agriculture, transportation, energy production. And once they get the ability to access money directly without having to beg the different nation states of the world, all bets are off. They'll be able to finance peace armies and UN police and courts and propaganda campaigns till their heart's content. It would become very, very difficult to constrain this institution if it were able to do that. And again, as I mentioned, it is in the final stages of imposing this tax on humanity. As soon as 2027, they expect to be collecting the money.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Alex, because this is obviously a whole new front and arguably the key one. Because conceivably, you even see power being conferred to enforce their edicts with various mechanisms funded by taxes on us. And as you know so well, Alex, this constitutional republic was born of the very simple principle, no taxation without representation. Is there anything to be done at this point about this prospect of taxing this way and presumably a precedent for others?
Well, one of the things that's very encouraging is that the Trump administration has been so clear about this. They actually circulated a letter at the IMO meeting in London that I mentioned in April saying this is an effort to redistribute our wealth under the guise of environmentalism, is how they phrased it. I loved it. And they said, we will not accept this. In fact, if you people go forward with this, we will impose measures to protect our shippers, to protect our producers in this country from your tax. And so that's very, very good news. But I want to remind people, this is another 3.5 years of this. Right? We have another election coming up. We've got the midterms coming up. So if Congress doesn't put these things into federal law, we will inevitably, and maybe it won't be 2028, 2029, maybe it'll be 2032, maybe it'll even be 2036. But at some point, we will end up with another president in office who will jump right back into all these agencies, all these policies, the World Health Organization, UNESCO, the international shipping tax. And so it's critical that it not be just the Trump administration pushing back, but that the Republican majorities in the House and in the Senate take action to enshrine some of these things into federal law.
Amen. Such a key point. Quickly, among the member nations, there is a very strong bloc known as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in the United Nations. You mentioned some of the others. This is just part and parcel, really, of the grand design of Sharia, the Ummah, coming together to enforce its will through partnerships with these globalists to varying degrees. In fact, I'm told that an agenda item this fall in the UN the UN General Assembly is going to be some kind of laying on of hands on Sharia, or at least perhaps Sharia blasphemy laws. Alex, give us quickly. We're going to have to take a break here in just a moment. A sense of the agenda of these Sharia supremacists and what it would mean for all of us if they succeed.
Well, one of the immediate objectives, of course, is to delegitimize the state of Israel as a precursor to delegitimizing the broader West. But they've made unbelievable progress, and I encourage people to look at what's happening in Western Europe. You now have the native populations in the minority in many of the major cities. You've got Muslim mayors. You've got Mohammed as the most common name. So many of them are openly talking about how they're going to conquer the West without even having to fire a shot, and they see the UN as a valuable tool in their effort to criminalize criticism of this and so much more. So folks, Western Europe is your future if you're not paying attention here.
Yeah, criminalizing under Sharia can mean a capital offense. Mm-hmm. And it's just unbelievable. But I remember Hillary Clinton was advocating for all of this during her time in office, thanks, I think, in part to her partner, Huma Abedin, of the Muslim Brotherhood strain. Alex, we have to take a final break. We'll drill down on this a little bit more, and then we'll talk a little bit towards the end about another threat vector, artificial intelligence. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with the great Alex Newman right after this. Welcome to our last installment of this very special edition of Securing America with our friend and much admired colleague, Alex Newman of Liberty Sentinel. I believe you can find all of his work at libertysentinel.org. Do I have that right, Alex?
That's right. Yep. Even the stuff that I do for other clients, we put up at libertysentinel.org if we can. Fantastic.
It is a tremendous resource on especially these issues of tyranny and its inexorable march through our institutions, yes, but now also through our nation. And the power, particularly, of concerted action by this totalitarian trifecta, the Chinese Communist Party and its friends, the globalists and theirs, and not least these Sharia supremacists, is not to be underestimated, folks, and we must be alive to it at every turn. Alex, put all this into the context. You touched on Israel a moment ago and the efforts to, well, not only to delegitimate it, but decompose it, I guess one might say. As we speak, there is a conference underway for the purposes of trying to help bring about yet another terrorist state in the Middle East carved out of the heartland of Israel, a so-called Palestinian state. What's up with that, sir, and how does that fit into this larger agenda as you see it, for Israel and for us, for that matter?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. And people need to understand, you're exactly right. This isn't just about delegitimizing the state of Israel. It's about first delegitimizing and then using that as a springboard to eventually remove the state of Israel from the face of the planet. And at this point, they sing it openly, right? When they say from the river to the sea, they're actually talking about removing all the Jews from this territory, ethnically cleansing this land from Jews. And they see Israel as kind of a little outpost of Western civilization, a little outpost of what they like to call imperialism in the Middle East. And so they see attacking Israel as the first step in attacking the broader free world. And the Soviets understood this, the Islamists understand this. In fact, many of the Islamists in Iran are very open. They call Israel the little Satan. We in the United States, of course, we're the great Satan. We're the big Satan. So people need to understand it's not just the Jews that they're after. It's anybody who stands in the way of this global destruction of freedom and the emergence of this, for the Muslims at least, the global totalitarian Islamic state. And Israel is just the first step in that war. It's kind of the front line in this battle. But make no mistake, America, you are absolutely next in line.
Yeah. And to the extent that we are persuaded that we can make deals with these guys, much as we talked about earlier with the Chinese communists, or for that matter, the globalists, Alex, is it not the case that their perception of you, if they think you are powerful and yet behaving in a manner that they regard as evidence of weakness, rather than trying to defeat them decisively, destroy them for that matter, which they respect and get as a strategy, that actually emboldens them to be more aggressive and more dangerous?
Absolutely, Frank. And if you look at Islamic theology, they've got a lot of doctrines that touch on these issues. When your enemy is far stronger, you behave in a peaceable way, and you behave yourself, and you don't draw too much negative attention to yourself. But when you're strong enough to go on the attack, you're commanded to do so. And they have the ability through, again, other Islamic doctrines like taqiyya, to deceive their enemies, to pretend to be friends when really they're plotting against you. And so this isn't a commentary on individual Muslims, it's a commentary on Islamic theology. But Islamic theology commands them to fight against the infidels wherever they may be found until the entire world is in submission to Allah. This is what their holy documents say. And so if we're going to have a proper strategy for defending ourselves against that, step one is understanding what we're dealing with.
You bet. You mentioned their theology. I think of it actually as ideology, because Sharia is, yes, it's got a sort of a patina of religiosity to it, but it is all about power and how it's wielded and how you get it and what you do with it once you've got it and so on. And it couldn't be more toxic to freedom and to us, as well as, of course, our friends in Israel and the free world more generally. We must all submit. That is the plan. And the trifecta is helping advance that cause in places like, of course, Israel and the Middle East at the moment. Alex, finally, is it an exaggeration to say that in artificial intelligence, particularly the sort of pell-mell rush to have it go wherever it will, we are possibly seeing an incredibly dangerous new tool put in the hands of these elites and these totalitarians at the expense of, again, us and our freedoms.
Unfortunately, I believe this could be the most powerful tool for advancing human enslavement that's ever been devised by man. So I'm not anti-technology. I'm not even anti-AI. I think there's wonderful applications that can be used for great things. But the reality is this is a tool that in the hands of the wrong people, and right now it's in the hands of the wrong people, could absolutely be the most destructive force we've ever seen on this planet. So I think people need to be talking about this. People need to be thinking about this because it is going to change life on this planet forever in the next few years.
What do you say in response to the question that, the proposition that is put to us frequently, and that is, well, we have to compete with China. If we don't, and they get to, advanced general intelligence before we do, they will rule the world, and we're toast. And if that entails, quite possibly becoming a lot more like China, so be it.
The reality is almost all of the communist Chinese technology is being ripped off from the United States and from the Western world. They are not innovating. They are stealing the technology that our companies and our taxpayers are paying for. So if we stop the bleeding, it will stop the march of the CCP's abuse and use of AI in its tracks. And I think that's the approach we need to be taking here.
And I would argue, in addition to be, in a very concerted way, working to bring down the Chinese Communist Party and, frankly, these other totalitarian threats as well. Nobody articulates that better than you do, Alex Newman, and I just cannot thank you enough for sharing your wonderful thoughts on all of these issues with us today, but also what you do day in and day out at Liberty Sentinel and the Sentinel Report, your podcast. These are, as are you, sir, national treasures, and they are to be, I hope, prized and supported as well. I know you can find out more about how to do that at libertysentinel.org. God bless you, Alex. Come back soon for updates if you would. In the meantime, stay well, and I'm fond of saying, go forth and multiply. Say that to the rest of you too. Come back to us next time. Talk to you then.